Hi, everyone. We will be beginning shortly. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Maria Gazek. I think we should begin. On behalf of this evening's sponsors, welcome to our discussion on small state strategies for reforming Armenia's military with international relations scholar, Dr. Edward Abrahamyan, and this evening's moderator, Dr. Zaven Karlajan. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors. They are the Ararat Eskidja Museum, the Armenian Bar Association, the Armenian Network of America, Greater New York, the Daughters of Vartan, Sahaganush Otyag, Justice Armenia, Knights of Vartan, Bakraduni Laj, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, Kalust Gulbenkian Foundation Lecture Series on Contemporary Armenian Issues, and St. Leon Armenian Church. Tonight's presentation represents the fifth in the What's Next series on the post-war Armenian reality. The previous discussions examined the 44-day catastrophe and its aftermath within a wider context of Russo-Armenian relations, shifting geopolitical currents across the South Caucasus, and Armenia's internal challenges. Three of the discussions featured linguist, diplomat, and legal scholar Armen Kharazian of blessed memory. Tonight's talk is dedicated to Armen's memory and his lifelong commitment to strengthen a sovereign Armenia. Armen suffered a fatal heart attack on January 27th. We mourn the loss of a beloved friend. We convey our heartfelt sympathy to his wife, Christine, daughter Zarine, son Ara, and many friends and colleagues here and across the globe. At this juncture, I'd like to ask Armen's childhood and lifelong friend, University of Illinois professor, Naida Hovagimian, to share some thoughts. Naida?
Good evening, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and memories of Armen. Armen was my classmate, and what I've put here in the background is the school that we both attended since 7 years old. Back in former Soviet Union, so our elementary, middle, and high schools were combined in one. And I know Armen since 7 years old, since we both stepped into this school and graduated together. Later, we both were in the same university, although I studied math and physics, and he studied humanities. And later, somehow, interestingly, our life united us in the United States. Armen came to work for Armenian embassy while I moved to Georgia Tech in 1998 as a visiting scholar, and then we both stayed in this country forever. Armen was a very dear friend, and there are many ways in which I can describe Armen, but if I have to choose just a few words to express the key character of his personality, he was always striving for flawless perfection, and he was always raising the bar in everything he did. The way he was structuring his relationships, his language, the way he expressed himself, and everything else he was doing was so very well measured. And there was only one dimension in which Armen was impossible to be measured. That was his unconditional love for people around him, his family, his friends, his parents, his brother, his classmates. Armen's heart was so big, he had place for everyone there. And every time, like I was going back to Armenia, he was always asking me whether I have met our classmates. I was always saying my time was so short, I had no time, but he always found time to meet our classmates, to meet all the friends, neighbors, relatives, close or far. And it's so kind of unbelievable that a person with this big heart could not stand a heart attack, because I always thought he's all powerful. There are no obstacles for Armen. Everything he was doing was absolutely done in the style of this perfection, flawless perfection. He would have cared for all the details. Like a few simple things I can just mention here as an example. Due to my work, I travel to Washington, D.C. a few times a year for NSF panels, Air Force meetings, and so on. Armen would come every time to pick me up from the airport, and he would never agree to pick me up from the drop-off pickup area close to the airport. He would always park the car and come and stand as close to the gate as possible. And I was always telling him, there is no need to do that. I travel so much. Washington is just one of the many travels that I do. It doesn't matter. Armen would do it in a flawless, perfect style. And last time I went to Washington, D.C., first time without having Armen meet me, I just went to that spot where he was always standing, and I stood there for long to feel his power. Armen came to the airport to pick me up on a day when his daughter was hit by a car and they were in a hospital for medical emergency. And I was just mad at him. Why did you come? You should have been with your family. No, he would always come to pick me up from the airport. And not just that, then we had all these nice evenings with his family, his wife, his mother, in the most beautiful restaurants of Washington, D.C. Armen would make the reservations, arrange for all the fine details, because I was there, his classmate, whom he wanted to treat in the best possible way. I always knew that if there is an opportunity to meet with him, I should sacrifice everything else, because that would be the quality time I will never forget. And I have all these memories today to cherish. And it's very hard to believe that we no more have him with us. I just hope that Armen's colleagues and friends like you, his kids most likely as well, will continue his legacy and his wisdom that he shared in so many different interviews will be appreciated and valued by our community, by our motherland. And most likely, if Armen didn't get a chance to see his dreams come true, most likely some of us will have that opportunity, or the younger generation, to see the flourishing Armenia with all its independence, with all its strength and power, the way Armen would have loved to see, the way Armen was fighting to achieve all that. I hope we'll get a chance to see and maybe cheer with him in our memories, and be forever thankful for having him among our friends. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you, Naida. I'm sorry for your and our loss. This evening's moderator is Zabin Kalajan. Dr. Kalajan received his BSc in electrical engineering from the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD in electrical and computer engineering from Johns Hopkins University. From 2001 to 2009, he lived in Yerevan and worked in the high-tech sector. Zabin currently resides in Virginia works in the defense industry, and is active in the DC Metro Armenian community. Zaven is a coordinator with the Justice Armenia Security Reform Research Project, the aim of which is to encourage researchers, analysts, and journalists in Armenia and elsewhere to critically probe Armenia's complex national security profile, of which defense is just one component. The project is informed by the belief that Armenia's security challenges are compounded by a lack of transparency surrounding defense matters, preventing serious political discourse on potential policy options. The goal of the project is to make a modest contribution to remedying this deficit. Zaven, I hand over the evening to you.
Thank you, Ara. Thank you, Ara, and thank you, Naida, for those memories of Ottoman. Very inspiring, and we will try to realize that dream of his, what he was working towards a prosperous and free Armenia. I'd like to thank our sponsors as well, and to the audience for joining us tonight for this talk. And it will be a conversation towards the end. The audience will have an opportunity to submit questions, and we welcome your questions, and we'll read them out with your name directed towards Edward, so that we can hear his response. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Edward, Dr. Edward Abrahamian. He's joining us from the UK, so it's midnight at his time. Thanks for going through this time shift with us. He joins us to discuss his recently published green paper on armed forces reform, where he focuses on small state military strategies and combining military threats through modern capabilities. This was published through the Helsinki Citizens Assembly. Dr. Abrahamian is a political scientist and teaching fellow at the University of Leicester in the UK, and his field of study includes foreign and military strategies of small states, strategic adaptation, and asymmetrical relationships. Dr. Abrahamian recently earned his doctoral degree from the University of Leicester in 2022, but his career in military history and foreign policy spans over a decade already. In 2010, he received his Candidate of Science in Military History from the Academy of Science of the Republic of Armenia. In 2017, he was awarded a Rumsfeld Fellowship at the Washington-based Foreign Policy Council. Abrahamian was a staff assistant and advisor in foreign affairs to President Armen Sarkisyan from 2019 to 2021. He was a senior fellow at the Institute for Statecraft based in London, as well as a regular contributor to IHS Markit, which is a leader in critical information and analytics and expertise, Jamestown Foundation, as well as other publications. And currently he's here tonight as a researcher with Justice Armenia on the Security Reform Research Project, where he and others are examining the military and foreign policy aspects of the 2020 war. Now, in the wake of the 2020 war, Armenia is, or at least it ought to be, in a period of self-evaluation and reorientation and recalibration. The military and geopolitical assumptions that Armenia held for decades turned out to be false, and we saw the result of this. And now we have to face some hard truths and understand where we stand today as a country and as a nation, and how we can move forward from this point. And Edward, with this in mind, could you very briefly introduce the Helsinki Citizens Assembly and how this paper came about, and give us an overview of the small state strategy concept, please?
Zaven, thank you very much for kind and solid introduction. Thank you very much for everyone who is presenting here and who allocated or found some time to be with us. The Helsinki Foundation initiated the research on something like a complementary research for the Armenian Armed Forces reforms in 2021, late 2021, and the final report released in May last year, which had wide range of different feedback, mostly positive feedback from governmental institutions, experts, organizations, including some international organizations from Europe. Just to get into the project and the small states discussion, I would like to start with some thought-provoking insights about the small states, and then we will warm up the discussion about Armenia, and then we'll start discussing it in a more in-depth way. So that there is a delusional or misleading assumption that the small states are weak and therefore they are peace-loving. In fact, the weakness of the small states is frequently mistaken for peacefulness, non-aggressiveness, and the desire to maintain the status quo in international system and international relations. In fact, there is a little evidence that small states are more peaceable than the great powers, even though some classical IR scholars like Raymond Aron insisted in 1960s that, for example, compared to the great powers, small states may not have offensive or should have offensive strategies, should have defensive strategies only. The accumulated knowledge of the small states proved opposite, in fact. For instance, another academist, Michael Handel, in late 1990s, came to the conclusion that the belief in the superior virtues of small states is just a romantic illusion. And in 20th century, weak states or small states fought one another, endangering their own existence, no less than have the great powers in the history. So it is important to bear in mind that the small states may behave like great powers or middle powers in terms of their military security and military utility of the military force and power, if the situation and the environment permits. It is also important to realize that the military strategy of every single small state depends highly influenced by the environment and the regional order they are operating. And for example, the Caucasus underwent several stages of regional order transformation, taking into account that since the end of since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, two small states, relatively weak states, Azerbaijan and Armenia, caught themselves in a fighting, in a political military rivalry, where Armenia, in fact, positioned itself as a state that challenged the status quo and tried to shift the status quo on its favor, positioning itself or appearing in the regional, transforming regional environment as a small power, using a military force to protect the Armenians of Karabakh and protect itself first and foremost, and defeated Azerbaijan with the result with the result in 1994 peace deal, not a peace deal, but ceasefire agreement. So the environment is important. The Caucasus regional environment transformed from mainly Euro-Atlantic cooperative or Euro-Atlantic integrative environment into a competitive confrontational environment since at least 2008. And Russia as a returning power to the region with a pursuit to establish its sphere of exclusive interest, which was in fact the hegemonic intentions to shape the region, to bring Russia to the Caucasus newly as a system shaping power. It brought with itself a certain code of conduct, a a set of new norms changing the regional order in the Caucasus. And here, for example, the use of force, the military coercion or intimidation turned into one of the instruments or characteristic features for the Caucasus regional order, where the military power or the performance of power in a military way became one of the norms of the region, as we may see it in 2008, in 2014 with Russia's intervention to Ukraine and seizure of Crimea, which definitely influenced the regional order and made the West more wanting in this part of the world. The escalation of 2016, the war of 2020, another war with Ukraine that is currently ongoing. So the Caucasus and the CIS space at large shifted in terms of code of conduct in its regional order, making it more confrontational, making it more distinct from, for example, the European system of norms and code of conduct. And this is very important to bear in mind when we come to the investigation of the small state military strategies. There is also a very important point that I would like to mention here, that the knowledge or the scholarship on small states emphasize that, as we may also quote here other scholars as well, Handel, for example, he also mentions that rational behavior of small states in the face of military aggression less effective for the small states, whereas irrational or assertive behavior is more positive, has a positive impact in terms of its in terms of achieving the main imperatives of the small states, which are, first is a bargaining power. So when the small state challenge the problems, challenge the military aggression from the other, from neighbor, for example, it gives an opportunity for the state to enhance its bargaining power. And historically, if we look at the small states' behavior in retrospect, for example, Finns in World War II fought Russians, and they resisted Russians, even though there are a serious a power disparity between the two countries. Greeks did the same with Italians, North Vietnamese with the US. While at the same time, by contrast, Czechs approach to their problem in a more rational way, and they decided not to resist, abandoned the policy of resistance, and they were occupied. The second imperative of the small states here, in terms of their military strategies and defense strategies, is to make sure that those action space, external action space, or freedom of maneuver is regularly augmented. So it is the action space and the freedom of maneuver of small states is a recipe for their survival, especially now amid the emerging competitive multipolarity. There is a number of smart small states who are trying to position themselves as an agenda setter in their environments, playing skillfully with differences, compatibilities or incompatibilities of the interests of great powers, and trying to fill the political niche by their military or political activities or influence. For example, in terms of offensive or assertive military strategies, we can emphasize United Arab Emirates. Israel is one of the classical examples. Singapore, that has preemptive doctrine, preemptive strike doctrine, and very strong and flexible reserve
Edward,
territorial. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a question at this point to concentrate on this part of your paper, which you're getting into now, but to frame it in the context of the paper, which highlighted the fact that small states, because they often face an asymmetric threat, they have a more powerful foe. They don't have the same powerful and perhaps wide-ranging weapon systems or intelligence and surveillance systems, cyber capabilities, for example, as a neighboring aggressor state. And as you brought up just a minute ago, in the 90s, Armenia and Azerbaijan were small states with perhaps more or less equal military capabilities, but that's not the case anymore. Now Azerbaijan has perhaps a mid-tier military capability that far outweighs ours. And we can't go toe-to-toe with Azerbaijan. So how does a small state react towards this type of asymmetry? What kind of tools are available to them defensively and offensively when they face this kind of asymmetric foe?
It is important to note, before I come to that question, is that Armenia before 2020 had a potential to position itself, if we look at the region from the prism of small state studies, to position itself to stand in the regional geopolitics as a small power, as a state that managed to be a rule maker in the region, challenging the post-Soviet status quo with the Karabakh issue, challenging the post-Soviet status quo and engaging into the power game with Azerbaijan in terms of the shift, the revisit of the post-Soviet borders, in fact. And with this position, with this geographic and geopolitical position, holding a large territory with about 42 square kilometers in total, Armenia had a strong potential to build up its political identity and political regional self positioning as a small power. But what we have now is that Armenia, in fact, negatively, after the defeat of 2020, Armenia found itself very vulnerable, profoundly vulnerable in territorial terms, resource terms, military and political terms, with Azerbaijan emerging as an ambitious state with a rule-making interests and ambitions in the region. So here we have a serious asymmetry, power asymmetry, and because of the defeat of Armenia in the war, there is a large power vacuum that all players in the region, including Azerbaijan, are seeking to fill. So this is very unusual and very complex, dangerous environment that Armenia found itself in. And the drastic, active, and fundamental solutions are important, at least to halt the degradation process, which means from potentially small power state, Armenia degraded into a micro-state in a qualitative sense. It is more, it is practicing more appeasing strategy towards all players in the region. it is more practicing like a fear bandwagoning strategy, which makes it a microstate. A microstate is a state that is not able to protect itself even in the case of threat from a small state like Azerbaijan, and is unable to make any influence or power projection in its imminent environment. So this is a conceptual problem that we face, and we need to recognize the symptoms of this, and then we should try to understand what kind of solutions is important to apply.
Absolutely, and in your paper you discuss examples of small states who have been able to build up themselves in order to project a very serious defensive posture and even sometimes offensive. So can you talk about some of the examples that you cover in your paper? You talk about a series of states from Estonia and Singapore and Finland and Israel that you mentioned. What qualities do these states have? How do they as small states influence their region, defend their interests and their territory, and all on a budget that doesn't match, superpower states, and presumably doesn't rely on the super weapons that larger states might have recourse to?
Well, my main argument and message, basically, of the report, Green Paper, was that Armenia should learn from the successful small states, should learn from the small states who inserted enormous amount of efforts along with the development of clear tasks, what to do for not only for survival, but also for augmenting their influence capabilities in terms of, the small states I mentioned in the report perform solid and flexible and strong, in fact, in relative terms, military strategies that made them able to resist or deter any potential threat, whether it is coming from smaller powers potentially or by great powers, making the cost of intervention basically too costly for the intervening power. So the message is clear here. All these states you mentioned, including Israel, Singapore, or whatever, even Switzerland or Austria, they made strong message, and even Finland or Sweden, that the country is ready to resist any kind of aggressive action against this state. In fact, this made, in some sense, aggressive or assertive that small states. If we take the example of Singapore, its preemptive strike strategy is justified with the fact that Singapore is too small, and its front line it has a front line. It may have a front line with no rear, which makes that any attempt of intervention may end the war. So the preemptive strike imposed by Singapore in its defensive system, in its psychology, in its doctrine, is made an important build-up in terms of deterring the potential aggressor. You should not wait until you are being attacked. You should wait the attack in front. You should be always prepared to resist and to make a strike night before you are being attacked. This kind of philosophy that, for example, Singapore has developed during the build-up of its defense strategy. But the task is important here. The problem with Armenian defense system, the problem with Armenia is that after the war, around 30% of Armenia has no strategic depth. And so there is no rear, for example, Syunik and Vayos Dzor. The front line is almost everywhere, from north, from south, from Nakhichevan and from Azerbaijan, the mainland. And so there is no rear here. So there are two things that should be developed in Armenia. First is to have a clear task. This is something that the political elite should come up with. Clear task, whether Armenia is moving towards returning back or getting back its international or regional status of a small power, then there are some set of tasks should be accomplished. Or Armenia is okay with being a microstate, being a client state, because the specificities of the regional order in the Caucasus, it is not only non-Western in its nature, yeah. So where the military force as a political tool can be used to achieve the political ends, but it is also highly hierarchic. So Azerbaijan here is playing a leading role in the Caucasus, between this inside of the region, amongst the three small states. It has allied relationship with Russia. It has allied relationship with Turkey. And so the system, the order in the region is felt or has prone to be regulated more by Azerbaijan. And Aliyev made it clear, for example, that was a year ago, that there is no project, no initiative, no policy is possible in the Caucasus without either acceptance, permission, or participation of Azerbaijan. This is a clear emphasis of Azerbaijan's ambitions to be the only security provider, let's say, in the region, with Armenia and Georgia being security consumers in the region. So, in other words, we have Azerbaijan with agenda-setting ambitions, rule-making ambitions, and Armenia currently is behaving more like a rule-taker in this situation. So the task is important. Political task, what Armenia want to achieve, and it should be tangible, and it should encompass visible actions and results. And the second, which is also, it comes with the objective and the task, is what kind of defense system, what kind of military strategy Armenia should adopt to achieve, first of all, its defensibility of borders, and second, how the military of Armenia or the military strategy of Armenia can contribute to the return of Armenia into the regional geopolitics.
So let's talk about that for a second, Edward, because some people might think the recent purchases from India and perhaps future purchases or in progress deals that Armenia might be making in order to arm itself, presumably in a way to become a peer to Azerbaijan. People might think that that's what Armenia should do right now. But it seems to me that your small state strategy perhaps would have a different vector of how to reform or how to develop the Armenian military strengths and specialities for the region and for the context that Armenia finds itself in. Could you go into some of the features of a small state defense that make it effective against an asymmetric threat?
Well, the small states studies show that the foreign policy is of paramount importance for the small state to develop an effective military strategy, because it is an important complementing factor or perhaps facilitating factor for the small state to develop the desirable military doctrine or defense doctrine, let's say. So the foreign policy is key because as we may see, the small states in the Western system, Estonia, for example, facing Russia's potential threat, developed in a different way in comparison with, for example, United Arab Emirates or Singapore. Even though the successful small states and the small states that have an ambition to develop the capabilities to project also military power, they are engaged in regular cooperation. And in fact, they cooperate and coordinate their actions. This has something to do with the doctrine or the concept of specialization some small states developed or adopted, like Estonia or the same Singapore or Switzerland. So the specialization means that in terms of security or defense, you can't be successful in producing. In fact, you can't produce anything if you are a small state, or anything, or few armaments or few military technologies can be developed by small. But the specialization means that you identify the niche and then you fill that niche with your specialists to become world leading in specific areas or issues or technologies. And Estonia, for example, Estonia is a good example here, because even the United States is one of the recipients of some technologies that are produced in Estonia. So specialization concept is important here. The prudent or pertinent foreign policy is also important here, because if we look at the Armenian defense system, there is no an Armenian tailored doctrine specifically designed to defend Armenia.
Is our defense structure mainly inherited from the Soviet Union?
Absolutely. So the problem here is the Armenian defense system is highly consolidated. It is like based on the Soviet-made Russian doctrine. It is like a top-down command-driven system with little room for subordinate military officers to come up with some ideas to discuss or to collaborate, basically. So in this case, this is we can explain this because of the Armenia's foreign policy vector. Yeah, it's geopolitical location, its military alliances with Russia, etc. But in order to make Armenia's defense more flexible and effective and more tailored, we need to learn from the small states in this case, because the limited, the conventional wisdom implies that the limited resources should lead you to come up with a more tailored strategy or more tailored policy to make these limited resources more effective. Mm. And here there is for example, NATO countries. There is a lot that Armenia can adopt. For example, the NCO system, non-commissioned officers in combination with the territorial defense. So here we need, from my perspective, NATO technologies, NATO education in terms of effective organization and utility of the military resources and human resources, active human resources, and the concept, for example, in Singapore, effective, or in Israel as well, effective population. There is also, something that Armenia should learn from, should take into account at least.
So that would be in conjunction with, I guess, some type of conscription process that Armenia already has, to be augmented by a voluntary professional army with NCOs and some type of educational system to inculcate those values that will feed those the military cadres, throughout the entire social sphere. It sounds like a very comprehensive change in terms of education, not just for people who have aspirations to serve in the military. Is that the case? Is that the case in Estonia, for example, or other countries?
Absolutely. So you can't, concentrate on reforming one sector while the others are not being effectively transformed. So it has a lot to do also with the mentality and political culture prevalent in Armenia, because the outdated system of defense and the operation of the military force, as we saw during the Karabakh War, was pretty much outdated. So there was the use of network-centric warfare tactics or network-centric warfare C2 systems. So this is simply because Russia, the main ally of Armenia, the main source of strength, external source of strength of Armenia, didn't achieve a lot in this field. So, so in order to survive, in order to fill the vacuum with the Armenian power proper, we should be more flexible. We should do a lot to change, to transform, to adapt the Armenian mentality in order to making it more prone to learn and to accumulate knowledge, to adapt the new technologies, to adapt the strategies, to tailor different doctrines to the Armenian needs, and so on. So I realized that being familiar to the governmental system by myself, I realized that in Armenia there is little intention in the political circles or in the political elite to get out from the
old ways, so to speak.
Not only the old ways, but also the old mentality, the comfort zone. The comfort zone is important here. It's like a Soviet legacy, and we need a fundamental transformation of every single sector, including the society as well. Because if we position ourselves as a democracy, then the civil society should be able to generate the ideas and to make bottom-up agendas for the political elites to move forward. This is also another gap that plays role in overall Armenia's situation in terms of defense, security, or foreign policy.
Edward, when I read your paper, I felt hopeful that there were some small state strategies that Armenia could realistically adopt. But I also felt despair in the sense that we witnessed Azerbaijan move from a small state, a peer small state, to someone who now is not our peer. It was very much our superior. And it occurred to me that they will exert now their power to keep us from moving in that direction as well. So it seems to me it's not only a matter of will to come out of the comfort zone. Armenia has to exert an extra measure of intentionality and of effort to overcome not only our own inertia, but also now the power of Azerbaijan next to us to keep us from achieving that. What do you think of that?
Well, the consolidation of all resources, the effective consolidation of all resources is key here. But the point is that the weakness is not a material. It's first and foremost, it is a mental, it is a socially constructed phenomena. In other words, Azerbaijan in 1994 was defeated by Armenia. It was a weak state. It had fundamental economic problems, the problems inside the society, but their political elite, led by Heydar Aliyev, persuaded themselves that they are not weak. So the weakness is something that can be, incorporated from outside. So the great powers, as the literature show, small state literature show that the weakness is very often something that are imposed. I mean, not imposed, but perhaps persuaded by the great powers to the small states. So, in other words, you are weak and you have nothing to do with this. So this is your destiny. Mm-hmm. There is no need to change anything. You should sit and wait until. So you are a doomed state, in other words. So the weakness is in the mentality and in the minds, in the mindset of the political elites and the society. If you come up to the conclusion that, okay, there is a room to maneuver, for example, in this case, if there is a room to reestablish yourself, to not to perform as a weak, to consolidate your resources, at least to make your potential adversary or ongoing adversary not to use the military force or intimidation as an effective tool to get concessions. So the Armenians, the Armenians imperative now, the first step is to do internally, do everything is possible to make Azerbaijan not to use the military force or pressure tactics or the coercion as the most effective way to get what it wants. And this is also has a lot to do with the weak state mentality, with the mentality of the weakness. You are not powerless. I mean, the small states literature teaches us that the small states, the elites of the small states, the societies, when they come to the conclusion that, okay, they are small, but they are not powerless, and they may make the differences in their regions. They may exert efforts and invest qualitative or non-material resources, which is intellectual resource, etc., to make their states more viable and defensible. Then they achieve something, mm-hmm. at least in this path. So the issue is to be.
Is the choice for Armenia to be to effectively? It sounds like you're saying to will itself into action, to cultivate its all of its resources towards a particular goal, towards a particular vision of what it is supposed to be in that region, as one option, or to continue along as a crying vassal state, waiting for some larger power to take care of it.
Well, yes. In other words, Armenia has two options here. Either it's sobering up, if you will, with the society and the political elites, relying on its own resources, relying on its own intellectual capabilities, its diaspora, its abilities to create, to learn, to adapt, and to develop its tailored, specific doctrines and concepts to follow. Or it is becoming a client state with a profound or entrenched tactics of appeasement, fear bandwagoning, etc. But for the first option, it is important to make choices. It is important, Armenia, in its contemporary political history, we may clearly identify that the political elites in Armenia very often avoided to make clear choices. We saw it during the reign of Sir Sargsyan, when it was when they was facing the dilemma, either EU or Eurasian Union. They come up with a concept of end-end, which is also a symptomatic. It's an embodiment of not to making the choices mentality. So the clear choices, clear tasks, putting differently, the society and the political elite should have clear objectives and visions, how they see Armenia's self-positioning in the region as a state, as an ambitious state. What are the Armenia's distinct interests here? And also the state interests are vague, quite vague.
So Edward, I want to bring in some of our listeners, because one question is related to this, and the question from Aram Shujunyan is asking, is recognizing the Republic of Artsakh a clear strategic and diplomatic vision or goal that he says as a tool to leverage against the Azerbaijan's threat? What would that do if we recognized Artsakh officially as a republic? Okay,
Artsakh for Armenia, if we look at the issue from the perspective of relative power discourse in international relations discipline, Artsakh has always been a source of Armenia's power in many aspects. It was Armenia's power base, critical power base. In all aspects, like in economy, in geographical position, in defense and security, a human resource. So also the political position, the political value of Armenia in international relations, sharing the so large border with Iran, being at the height of the Caucasus Mountains, having deployable force, or performing or demonstrating that you have an ambition to defend your interests and positions in Artsakh. So Artsakh was an important key element of Armenia's small power performance. Okay. Recognition of Artsakh now, I don't think it may add value. I mean, the Artsakh, the Artsakh's recognition by Armenia, when in fact Armenia is not a responsible state, Armenia is not presenting at the moment in Artsakh or in the territory what was remaining at the moment, has little value here. So the different tactics, different strategy should be developed from my perspective. It should. I mean, the war should have clear assessment, documented assessment by Armenia, the results of the war. It should be clearly stated. The message should be clear that Armenia is challenging the results of the war. Armenia is challenging the ways how Azerbaijan came to these results. And
I don't know what you mean by that. Are we asking for some arbitration from somewhere to say that this something was illegal, or what do you mean by that?
Well, what's the Armenia's official position about the war in Artsakh? There is no document identifying Armenia's clear assessment of what happened. Like, we are a parliamentary state, but Armenia's parliament never come up with any resolution about the situation, about what happened, about the war, about the borders, about the territories that have been lost, about the people of Artsakh, about the ethnic cleansing Artsakh faced or Armenia faced during the war. So there is no clarification, no clear position towards what happened. Mm-hmm. This is the first step. The second step is to show the powers involved in the region, and also to Azerbaijan, that we are not, we will continue fighting. Armenia as a state is not going to accept the current status of Armenian statehood, which is a microstate, in fact. Mm-hmm. The recognition of Artsakh is like a one-step tactics. I'm talking about multi-step strategy, which includes also military capabilities enhancement, which includes proactive political process. So the struggle, the continuation of Armenia's struggle for Artsakh is not only about recognition of Artsakh as an independent state. It is about, it is initially was an idea of Miatsum. Mm-hmm. It is initially was an idea of Miatsum. So this is something that should be re-evaluated. So the Artsakh problem by Armenia should be re-evaluated. So it is very fundamental. It is more conceptual issue than only just a recognition.
I'd like to point out that this is a question that that comes up in diasporans' minds, and I'm sure even in the Armenian and Artsakh citizens' minds, so much that it just shows the lack of a plan, of a vision, of an understanding of what the next step should be for our nation. This is something that we've been asking ourselves, and different people have different perspectives and answers, but there is no signal from the leaders of the country of Armenia about what we should feel and how we should participate in, for example, recognizing Artsakh or not, or taking a certain step towards developing a small state capacity or not.
It is also, I would like to mention here that it is also the Artsakh problem that we are facing now. It was also about not to make clear choices and not to put clear tasks. Because with Artsakh before 2020, it was not, domestically, there was not a domestically developed legal basis about Armenia's association with Artsakh. There was not clear intention what Armenia wants. There was not a clear vision how Armenia sees the solution of the problem based on Armenia's national interests. Setting aside what the great powers or other states should think about that. First and foremost, Armenia should have developed its own vision how it sees the just and final solution of the problem. And the final solution is not about making another non-viable quasi-state. It is about the final and our irreversible, Miatsum. to make a more stronger state, to make a more less vulnerable state and more viable state. Because if you have two non-viable states, then you gain nothing, in fact.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have to overcome a certain trepidation or perhaps queasiness about becoming a state that could arm itself to the point where it projects power to defend its interests. Your paper has a quote from Rudyard Kipling that says, "War is evil, I am sure of that, but the world would be worse for unarmed dreamers if evil men were not killed from time to time." And it seems that under that kind of spirit, we should understand that if we want to defend our culture and our nation, there's some things that we have to resort to. I want to go to another question. Since you have experience with the Armenian government, and I'm sure you have many connections there, the question is: this seems to be all talk. Is there anything being done to get these good suggestions and advice to the government of Armenia, or to the Ministry of Defense, or to the structures that could impact our defense status?
Well, it is hard to evaluate this. Well, they are very well aware of the report. They, in fact, provided like positive feedbacks about them. But as long as Armenia is it can be harsh, but as long as Armenia is a one-man show, let's be clear. As long as Armenia still has not established like state institutions that may operate no matter who is in power, and as long as everything is fully concentrated, decision-making is concentrated on one man's personal perceptions of the international relations, the limits of its perceptions, the limits of knowledge, I don't think it will be possible to have a serious breakthrough. Even we have, a dozen of these kind of reports. This is my personal, it's not, I don't want to be a pessimistic, but, when I mentioned that the problem lies in the mentality, it also includes this issue. We don't have an established statehood with the statecraft, effective statecraft that realizes the interests, that have clear calculations, have clear scenarios about what Armenia may face and what we should react. In that case, we will rather have, most likely we will have short, small, and very tactical one-step moves.
So here's another question from Adik, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the gist of it is that we've been talking about the will of our leadership and of the citizens as well, and the determination to make something of Armenia. His question is it realistic for Armenia to try to project power the way Singapore and Israel and Scandinavian states are capable? Is that something within our reach?
Well, yes, absolutely. It was seemed unrealistic in early 1990s about the Karabakh. So everything is realistic. I mean, I don't believe in non-alternativity. There is no non-alternativity in nature, in social science, in everywhere. So the states are organisms that may put an objective, or put a clear task and move towards its realization. So if there is a clear intention, task, and measurable actions, then, well, everything is possible. We have a strong diaspora. There is an opportunity. It may be a very, very, effective small power tool for Armenia. If the Armenia start to realize its interest if it develops ambitions, if they design the pathway how the interest can be best achieved with the diaspora's involvement in that, facilitation in that achievement in terms of foreign policy, for example, then everything is possible, let alone, the intellectual capabilities. So the issue is how to make, if you don't have an objective, let me put in another way, if you don't have a task, if you don't have an objective, then why don't you need to mobilize anything, to consolidate anything? But contrarily to that, if you have an objective, then it's a human nature. You are engaged in seeking the resources to fulfill or to accomplish. To achieve that objective. So it's simple. As simple as that.
I was skeptical like the questioner, because the examples that you gave of Switzerland and Singapore, they have multi-$100 billion GDPs, and compared to Armenia, that's orders of magnitude of wealth. But the interesting counterexample to that you brought up was Estonia, which you pointed out has a population comparable to Armenia, has a GDP that's grown certainly in the past 10, 20 years, but it's not out of the range or the realm of Armenia's capability, including the diasporan resources that we have.
And also Israel. Zaven, also Israel in 1960s. It was a very poor, small country. They were trying, the delegations of Israel were trying to get some, contracts to export the oranges. And now what they have achieved now, that's a process. We should look at in the continuum. It is very dynamic. You may be poor now, but if you have an objective, if you have a clear ambition and have a strategy to follow, you may then consolidate your resources. You may have tried to invest, to build, and to develop. So we are living in the age of intellectual breakthroughs. So Estonia is also a very good example, as you mentioned. Estonia with a population of about 1,500,000, but they have highly educated, professional, intellectual society, which is critically involved in a wider context of, for example, in NATO, cybersecurity. They are, in fact, providing a large amount of service to the whole NATO cybersecurity, being a small state. And also technologies.
This lines up with a comment from Mark Chenyan, who says, Armenia's most important task is to become relevant to the rest of the world, economically, politically, culturally, to achieve these goals.
Would but foreign policy here is very important. So the foreign policy may highly influence the future of the society and the country. If Armenia is a democratic society, if Armenia is a democratic state, then it should make clear foreign policy choices about this. If we realize that the Western technologies are important for Armenia to develop or to survive, the Western technologies are developed. The access to the Western technologies are very important in terms of defense and security. Otherwise, I don't see an option how Armenia may, craft or develop, network-centric, very, modern military force to defend itself.
So this dovetails in with Alan Whitehorn's comment or question. Is there a sufficient presence and depth of defense and international relations think tanks in Armenia or around Armenia? If not, well, why not? Because those would be the natural means and conduits of bringing in not only potentially technologies, but also methods and processes internal to the military, operational strategies. These things seem to be rather important requirements for building up our own capabilities. So are there think tanks? Do we have defense or international relations think tanks or organizations that could help Armenia?
Think tanks outside Armenia or inside Armenia?
Outside, working with Armenia.
Well, there is plenty of options that Armenia can hire, for example, specialists. It is always about the political willingness. I mean, we can look at, for example, Azerbaijan. They had very, let's say, egoistic foreign policy in a positive way, not a negative. They had a clear task and objectives, and they were seeking what country or what specialist, what organization can fulfill that objective, can contribute to that. If they they may go to Russians, and figuratively speaking, provide some list of what they want, and Russians can say, okay, this or that we can provide, the rest we are unable to. Then Azeris said, okay, and they may go another party, because their foreign policy settings makes this unable to come up with this kind of culture of interaction between different countries or organizations. Whereas Armenia is a very much safe, isolated, and well, at the end of the day, I mean, yes, but there is a potentially, I can name some organizations or think tanks that may come up with a significant contribution to Armenia in terms of developing a clear vision, in terms of making Armenia more visible. But everything is about the political will and willingness in Yerevan, in the political elites and ruling elites.
Do you think we can, according to Glenn Herosian's question, do you think we could follow some of the path that Georgia took, because they've looked to the West and they've gotten much closer with NATO? Is NATO a resource for Armenia potentially?
Well, NATO is a critical resource for Armenia in terms of technologies, in terms of education, military education, financial resources. I mean, nearly almost everything. If we want to, establish a modern, resilient, transparent statehood and statecraft. I mean, the war in Ukraine opened a certain room for Armenia to maneuver with the West and with Russia, especially when we can, see that Russia's, system shaping ambitions in the Caucasus contradicts to Armenia's interest, which was visible in 2020. They have cut not only, in fact, sanctioned the war against Armenia, but also tolerated Turkish involvement in the Caucasus, perhaps having in mind a hope that Turkey, as a non-Western state in terms of norms and its interest, may add may provide additional power to Russia to maneuver in the regions that it considers as a sphere of its influence. But we should be clear with both parties, with Russia, with the West. But the decision should be made. I mean, there should be clear choices taken by Armenia here, and the Ukrainian war is one of the room providers in this situation, because it is obvious that there is a process of re-evaluation or reassessment of the regions of influence, the polar regions of influence And if Armenia decides to be with Russia, then it should be clearly stated that we are in Russia, we are with Russia, we are sort of, contributing to the entrenchment of the non-Western regional order, where the power and hierarchy are dominating. Or we should be clear with this situation and make choices in favor of the West. Because in terms of defending ourselves, Azeris did that choice. Azeris made it clear that they are with Russia in terms of regional power influences. They are very anti-Western in terms of their regime. They have a close, compatible value system with Russia. Both regimes are autocratic, fully consolidated.
Yet they didn't join the CSTO.
They didn't join the CSTO because they don't need it. They have a bilateral ally relationship with Russia. They are very, congruent with Russia in terms of Western influences. They in fact fight against the Western influences together. And Russia has recognized Azerbaijan as one of the reliable states that tackle the orange, so-called orange revolutions. So it's clear here. And Georgia, with the critical country for us, and also Iran, critical country, even though our society values or regime values are not compatible, but for Armenia, there are two strategic states, Georgia and Iran, with which Armenia has no strategic relationship, has no strategic partnership document. That's a nonsense. So it is obvious that there is something problematic with Armenia's foreign policy that was developed in 30 years, which need to be revisited as soon as possible.
So Stefan Asturian asks, how does Dr. Abrahamyan explain that when Azerbaijan was spending 6 times more on advanced armaments from 2009, the Armenian defense establishment felt superior to Azerbaijan's force? And I want to relate that question to what you were just talking about in terms of taking a stand, because isn't this, I'm guessing is what your answer to this question might be, doesn't that show an implicit alignment already with Russia, even though perhaps it wasn't documented and publicized and internationally made known in a clear way? Didn't we see an implicit alignment with Russia for the since independence until very, very recently?
Well, when we look at the Russia-Azerbaijan relationship, it is crystal clear that at least in 1997, when Levon Ter-Petrosyan cut a deal with Boris Yeltsin about strategic relationship between Armenia and Russia, following a month, if I'm not mistaken, almost comparable perhaps, document has been signed by Heydar Aliyev and Yeltsin without clear security commitments. But at the end of the day, that was a clear emphasis by Azerbaijan that it recognized Russia's superiority in the region as the main superpower, as the main power at least. In 2009, when Putin has already in power, and they have clear rapprochement with Heydar Aliyev and then Ilham Aliyev. Week before Russia's intervention to Georgia, Medvedev just came to the office. He visited Baku, and there was a Baku declaration about the strategic partnership between Russia and Azerbaijan, and in there was Aliyev made statements about, and there was the documentation between Russia and Azerbaijan. made it clear that in international context, the vision of two leaders of two countries are either similar or very close about the multipolar world order, about the intervention and the imposition of the democratic regimes inside of the CIS state. So in 2009, in 2010, when first military deals were cut between Russia and Azerbaijan, it was obvious that the power parity will be changing. But Armenia, in fact, did, I mean, this is a very important question here, because Armenia was observing, the leadership in Armenia was, long observing how Azerbaijan is getting stronger. And Azerbaijan has never, concealed, I mean, Azerbaijan's intentions were always clear. It was stated that if the situation is not solved diplomatically, they will apply a military force. Even though formally three major powers involved in Minsk group, France, namely France, Russia, and the United States, made several times clear, like they stated, that there is no military solution. Azerbaijan challenged these powers in that term. This is important to understand that Armenia were just observing how they are getting stronger, and which ended up with the war. This is another evidence that the political elites, at least, were failed to understand the dynamics of the international relations, the dynamics taking place in the region right after 2008. And they didn't make necessary choices to get alternatives, to get the situation more controllable by the Armenian side. Instead, they keep putting, hope on Russia, that Russia is our ally and it will never allow any military aggression against Armenia or against Armenia's security interest in Karabakh. And they failed because the political calculations here, the ability to ponder, to identify the changes in the geopolitics of the region, prompted you to do something, to react, to respond to the shifts. They can be strategic shifts like 2008, 2014. But we may see that the Armenian government was quite alienated from knowledge, from understanding the dynamics, and from the calculation of the possible like situations that Armenia may face in the near future.
Isn't it also the case in conjunction with this alienation of from the reality that they faced, that they were with regard to Russia entangled in many ways in corrupt structures and interactions that made it difficult for them to look elsewhere, to look would hinder the desire to look elsewhere, because their personal benefits at stake when you move from one partner who and you have some backdoor relations with, and versus another partner that you're starting fresh.
I mean, but the problem is more complex. I mean, this is a combination of different factors, including the corrupt system, including the traditional closeness of statesmen, Russia and Armenia, and the comfort zone. The comfort zone is also playing a significant role here. When the politicians would rather rely on an external force to solve their own problems than getting into the hard work or investing efforts to solve their problems on their own, I mean, this is also it is a matter of mentality. When I refer to the mentality as one of the sources, as one of the fields that should be fixed, this is exactly about this. I mean, the mentality to rely on your resources, rely on your knowledge, the ability to learn, the ability to adapt, the ability to bring the best options, the best solutions, and to integrate or to install into your reality is another ability. So yeah, I mean, it is one of the what you are mentioning is just one of the reasons, but it is not the only reason here why Armenia performed so inadequately towards what's going to happen in terms of Karabakh or in terms of the war.
So this has been perhaps kind of heavy. I want to change the tone a little bit and ask what Gary Artinian asks, what are the positive or hopeful aspects that you cover perhaps in your paper, or that you can see in terms of Armenia taking steps towards a future more stable and a secure state?
Well, the paper was mostly focused on defense and security strategy aspects. And what I emphasize is that the education here is key, is a core issue that Armenia's military or general staff or the defense mind is lacking, like the education which may be effectively used to defend, to make the planning of the defense of the Armenia's territory. So the education and the Western education proved to be one of the best, and we can, in terms of territorial defense, how they effectively introduced and made it operable. The territorial defense concept in Ukraine is obviously is a proof of the effectiveness. But in general, I think the again, I want to refer to the mentality, but the problem of all successive Armenia's ruling elites was that the weak state mentality prevailed, and rather than building your own country based on your visions and interest, relying on your resources, accumulating the power, accumulating the resources, making the society, the new generations, intellectually more effective in terms of developing the state, they were in almost all cases relied on the external force, external powers decisions, and even in the economy. Armenia, in fact, had a chance to sign the associated agreement with the Europe, even if Russians didn't want it to do. Armenia had a chance, or had a room to maneuver and not to get involved into Eurasian Union, for example, being like adopting a strategy of free trade agreements, being associated with both European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union, like some other countries did. But the self-isolationist and one vector policy, and so Moscow-centric mentality, I think, played very negative role with us. So this is the moment when the Armenian society itself should start asking the questions: why this happened, why it's still happening, and what is our future, and which is in our hands, not in Aliyev's hands or Russia's or Turkey or the West. This is a bunch of a set of choices that Armenian society, along with the leadership, should make to achieve anything, at least to come up to end up to something. You can't be always in the middle. You can't always avoid making choices. You can't just rely on, for example, as you mentioned, India's military industrial complex, but to put all your eggs on one basket and waiting for some results. This is not going to work.
So Edward, I asked for some positive, hopeful note, and it seems like there's an abundance of missed opportunities and indecision and wrong decisions. Is there anything hopeful that you see, or is there anything we can get behind and support to push forward for a positive reform?
There is a certain room that the Armenians, diaspora Armenians, and the best minds of Armenia can get together and start shaping the ideas, plans, and agendas. So it is important to make the government face clear agendas coming from the bottom, without any populistic, maneuverability, without manipulations, as they always do. It should be very clear. Either you are able to, fulfill the objectives, or you are living in another qualitatively new, with the good qualities, new political elite is coming to steer the country and to fulfill the objectives and plans that the best minds of Armenian and Armenian diaspora come up with. This is, I think, it is hard to achieve, but everything is hard around Armenia.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are certainly hopeful words and encouraging. Ada, I see that you joined in.
Yes. And I would add that to Edward's comment that I think it was Patton that had a statement that said, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And that's what your last comment made me think of. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. But thank you, Edward. Thank you, Zaven. You were both wonderful this evening. Thank you for your time. Thank you to our sponsors. And once again, I'd like to repeat who they are. They are the Ararat Eskijian Museum, the Armenian Bar Association, Armenian Network of America, the Daughters of Vartan Saganush Otyag, Justice Armenia, the Knights of Vartan Bakraduni Lodge, Nasser Kalus Gulbenkian Foundation, lecture series on contemporary Armenian issues, and St. Leon Armenian Church. We ask all to reflect on the proposition that the strategy, defense, and security reform is an urgent matter for all citizens of Armenia, all elements of its government at all levels of the Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces, all members of the diaspora, and all those who care about the future of an independent, healthy, economically viable, and democratic Armenia. This evening's program is recorded and can be watched on YouTube at St. Leon Events. And thank you all. Thank you to our audience. Thank you, Zaven. Thank you, Edward, again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for everyone. Thank you.